Good evening, and thanks everybody for showing up tonight. And for those who may be watching this either tonight or on our future recording of this, thank you for tuning in. I'm Jeff Fasser with the BSC Group, and we are the firm that prepared the Downtown Urban Revitalization Plan that was approved in 2012. And we're here tonight to talk about Amendment 1 to that Urban Renewal Plan. Things have changed since 2012, and we want to update the plan to reflect those changes, as well as map out some new action items for the next number of years, which will be determined as we prepare the amendment. We'll determine how far in the future we want this amendment to be in place. So I'm going to start with an urban renewal program overview to give everybody to understand what the urban renewal program is all about. Talk about the objectives and actions that were in the original 2012 plan, and also a brief study that was done in 2020 during COVID to see what may be done through this urban renewal plan. Adam is then going to talk about the work we've done to date, documenting existing conditions. And then after that, we have these 4 breakout tables, and we'll explain what they're about, but it's an opportunity for people to circulate around and give input on 4 different topics that we feel are critical to the urban renewal plan. So, urban renewal plan, it's a state program. Many people may remember it from the 60s and 70s, where communities adopted urban renewal plans and blocks were buildings were acquired and blocks were leveled waiting for investment to happen. That doesn't happen these days with urban renewal plans. Urban renewal plans are very strategic these days and target specific actions on specific parcels or maybe a grouping of parcels, but nothing is acquired or nothing is demolished until a particular development or action is in place so that things aren't sitting here vacant. It's really an economic development strategy. Communities who are struggling economically can use the urban renewal program to stimulate economic investment in their community. One thing that can be done through an urban renewal plan is a redevelopment authority, which you have, can actually acquire property for economic development and investment purposes. Towns can't do that for economic development. They can do it for roads, for schools, for playgrounds, public infrastructure, things like that, but they can't acquire property for economic development purposes, so that is a major element of an urban renewal plan. As the second bullet here talks about the need for public sector assistance, and that means if areas are stagnant economically, they may remain or have been stagnant for a number of years. Sometimes it takes public investment and public action to stimulate economic investment, and that is done through an urban renewal plan. And who implements urban renewal plans? In your case, it's the Redevelopment Authority. You have the Southbridge Redevelopment Authority. It was established back in 2003. And again, the plan was developed and some things have taken place from that first plan, which we'll explain in a couple minutes here. So as this mentioned, it was established in 23. There are 5 members in a redevelopment that can serve on a redevelopment authority. 4 of those members are listed on this slide here, and a few of them are here tonight. If you could raise your hands so people know. Holly. And there's 1 vacancy right now. So there's 4 members. This applies to every redevelopment authority. There are 4 local members. Well, everybody has to be local from the town, but 4 appointed by the town, and then 1 more is appointed by the governor. And that's the vacant position right now. The types of actions that redevelopment authorities can undertake, again, to stimulate this economic investment, are things like establish rehabilitation and design guidelines. So as improvements are made to buildings or spaces, it meets a certain criteria established by the redevelopment authority. They can directly participate in real estate development and commercial revitalization. So once a plan is approved and certain actions are identified, if the redevelopment authority needs to step in to help broker a deal between a current property owner and someone who wants to invest in the community, they can help broker that deal. They can also bring some potential grants or other investments to the area, such as you've been doing with your investment in streets and sidewalks and now the rail trail. Sometimes those are the things that help entice developers to come in and spend money, and the redevelopment authority can undertake those actions on private investment to stimulate public investment to stimulate private investment. They can issue bonds, borrow money, but those all have to be backed by the town. So some communities, again, because they're economically distressed, really can't back those bonds and borrowing. But if the climate is right, they're able to do that. Certainly accept gifts or requests. They can assemble parcels. This means they can acquire parcels of land. In many cases, we're finding older communities have smaller parcels, and they're really not of interest to developers who might need a larger parcel to invest in a development or a way that's going to get a return on their investment. We're not talking about big profits for people, but we are talking about these are private enterprise, and except in a case of a nonprofit, they're out to get a return on their investment. If the redevelopment authority does acquire property and there's a certain activity that's on that property now, such as a business, they're required to relocate that business to a new location, that business selects and pay for all the costs of moving their business from one location to a new location. And then if it's necessary, again, this is what may help a developer. The redevelopment authority could demolish buildings or do some initial rehab work to buildings to, again, take the load off of private developers to help what we call pencil out their investment, or they're willing to put a certain amount of money in, expecting a certain investment, but sometimes they need a little bit more help to bridge that gap there. Back in 2012, this was identified as the urban renewal area. So you can see the Quinnebog River up to the top. That sweeping greenish line just below it is the old rail bed that's being converted into the Quinnebog Valley Rail Trail. And then you see the red line basically along Central, kind of a block back from Main Street and a block back from Hamilton Street. So really the core of the downtown area was what was included in the original plan. The goal of that original plan was to create a more vibrant downtown through a series of public actions, again, as I mentioned, to stimulate private investment and really get a revitalized downtown that's a mix of housing and retail activity, commercial activity, public infrastructure improvements, places for people to gather in public spaces and have special events as such to really make it vibrant. You need all those things. The objectives, and I'll go through these quickly, but the key words are underlined. We are trying to promote mixed-use development. What we mean by that is, where possible, retail on the first floor. It could be housing above, could be offices above, but we want to move away from each building and each parcel should only support one use. We want to encourage multiple uses on a parcel. That helps with economic sustainability so that a parcel or a building isn't relying on just one funding source, such as if it's all offices and the office market softens like it has lately with people working from home, then they lose a lot of their revenue. But if they had a residential in with offices, the residential may carry them through if the office market gets soft. Urban renewal plans want to have minimal land acquisitions. The whole intent is to stimulate and encourage private investment in the area, but an urban renewal plan does give the redevelopment authority the ability to acquire certain properties, but those properties have to be identified up front, and they can't add other new properties without doing an amendment to the plan. So whatever comes out of this plan is potential acquisitions. That's what the redevelopment authority has to work with. And again, different types of things in the plan are residential, open space, encourage business growth. We have a number of upper levels of buildings here that are either vacant or highly underutilized. How can we get more uses in the upper level of these great buildings that you've been able to preserve over the year that really give you the historic character in your downtown, really makes it very appealing. Along with this, it's job creation and improving not just by traffic flow, we mean vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles in downtown. Getting back to the original plan, these are in the plan now. These are actions we want to build upon in this amendment. Some of these will stay in there, if not all these will stay in there. Again, mixed-use properties, new open space, zoning improvements to encourage this mixed-use development, roadway improvements. You've seen some of those go on. A lot's being planned, and some were talked about earlier tonight. Again, the pedestrian improvements, so it's comfortable, safe circulation through downtown. Make sure there's enough property, and if necessary, what parcels might be key acquisitions for the redevelopment authority in order to package an area for redevelopment. This map here, again, the red dash line shows that same outline as the original urban renewal area. And there are call-outs in these text boxes around the downtown that really called out the major actions in the 2012 plan. So I'm going to start at the top left and go down, then jump to the right and go from top to bottom. So on the top left, it was talk about a riverfront park along the Quinnebog River. This area is accessed by a drive that kind of goes beside Osterman's, between Osterman's and Tassie's, and goes down to that parcel back there that's greatly underutilized but provides great access to the river. We believe your river is an untapped asset. It's hard to get access to it, certainly in the downtown area. It's hard to see it. There's no access to it. It could be a great amenity. It could be canoeing, kayaking, and there are even rapids on that river. If town was to do something with the Army Corps, they could release land up at the release water up at the Westville Dam area and have a surge of water that could really support some fun rafting activities along the river. That would draw people into downtown. That would help people spend money here. That would help businesses here thrive and grow. Below that, and this is circled in a dashed line because these are the actions from the 2012 plan where activity is taking place or about to take place. So the rail trail is under construction. Congratulations. It's been talked about for how many years? And it's underway. Next, below that is traffic improvements involving Hook Street, La Rochelle Way, Hamilton, connecting over to Foster and Central. This diagram that's on the board shows those potential roadway improvements. They've now been designed. I don't know if many of you may have seen those designs because they've been talked about a lot. And funding is in place from MassDOT, MassDOT to construct those improvements. So all those traffic improvements are going to take place downtown, make it a safer way to circulate through that area. I used to live in Southbridge for 30 years, and you all have lived here for many, many years. And trying to decide, do I go down La Rochelle? Do I go down Hook? Which way do I go? And geez, if I could just get from Central to Foster without going through that crazy intersection across from Hook, that would be a lot easier. All those things are going to be resolved. This plan talked about improving the parking for the senior center. The train depot was a senior center when this plan was done. Now it's the RMV, but who knows what that might be in the future. Realign Hamilton. Again, we talked about that with roadway improvements. There was a historic building at the corner of Hamilton. It's a small red brick building, corner of Hamilton and La Rochelle, in Hook. For the roadway improvements, the thought was that would need to be relocated, but the current design doesn't require that, so that can stay in place. And then the bottom left is the Central Street parking lot. When this plan was developed, the thought was to put a parking deck where Central Street parking lot is. So you still have ground level parking. You'd have a deck above that, which would provide easier access into the upper levels of the abutting buildings. The town went ahead and revitalized the Central Street parking lot as a surface parking lot. So that's been done. The deck is off the table. Again, top right, again, talk about the roadway improvements, Foster and Central, a trailhead park associated with the Quinnebog River Rail Trail. There will be a small park area there. As part of this amendment, we may want to talk about building upon that, maybe have a bigger presence in downtown. Below that, again, roadway improvements. And these lighter or orangey or beige colored buildings that you see that are different from the very light yellow or buff colored buildings were talked about as new buildings along Central and La Rochelle. But things have happened since 2012, and now you've got Mellow Tiger that has talked about investing in the current building that's along La Rochelle Way. They've put a funky car on their roof. Even that in and of itself is kind of neat. Central Street, Central Pizza has put a lot of money into their building and their business, which is great. And now, as was talked about earlier, there's an interest in maybe making Central Hamilton a one-way loop, which would allow more safer circulation and more sidewalk space for pedestrians and maybe some outdoor seating there. So that would really build upon the existing buildings. So it's up to you all, because we're here to reflect your town preferences in the urban renewal plan, but maybe all those new buildings aren't required anymore. Parking garage we talked about, and widen Central Street. Well, instead of widening it, if it becomes one way, then you've got those wider sidewalk areas and safer circulation. So that's another way of achieving the same intent of what we want to do with a widened Central Street. In 2020, during COVID, the state made some money available to communities to, again, look at economic development and make sure that we're trying to minimize the effects of COVID on our commercial and retail businesses. The state hired us to work with the town, so it was the state assigning us to Southbridge, which we were thrilled about because we had done the original plan. And a number of things were brought up during that 2020 update of things that the town still needs to do to help stimulate and support economic activities in downtown. So you can see all these. A lot of these are similar to what was in the original plan, but you'll also see at the bottom funding assistance for startup minority businesses, and engagement with Black and Latinx community members. You have a very diverse community here, which is great. We need to build upon that diversity and use that. In this particular case, are there economic opportunities based on that diversity, and making sure the town and the redevelopment authority is connecting with those different populations and making them aware of the fact that there are opportunities in the downtown area. And if they want to invest, you're open for business. Again, in 2020, a lot of the same things were recommended. I'm going to jump over this because now we're talking about the amendment, which I'll get to in a minute. Again, these are the investments that have happened to date. It's been great. I mean, look at all this money that's come into town, and selfishly, we can take a little bit of credit that a lot of these ideas came out of the urban renewal plan, but they were necessary improvements. The Central Street parking lot, the roadway network I talked about. There was a Main Street infrastructure improvement project along Main Street, infrastructure roadway and sidewalks there, and the rail trail at $4.4 million. So if someone can do the addition in their head quicker than I can, you know, we're approaching $10 million here. Right now, there's a project ongoing on River Crane Street. It's kind of improving the street, but tying into the rail trail there. That's another big chunk of money that's going into the downtown area. Private investments, Mellow Tiger. Hopefully that'll get up and running, but we're looking forward to that actually taking place. McCarthy Properties, who owns a number of buildings in town, invested in their parcel at that large building at the corner of Main and Central and Foster Central Street. And that's much better looking right now, and some uses in there, and hopefully it'll fill up. Central Pizza I talked about, and then just outside the urban renewal area, but current building is being rehabbed for high-end apartments on Foster Street, so that'll bring some residential into downtown. We know there's some on some of the abutting streets, there's some investment in some residential properties also. You know, it's good. You want to have people living downtown, people's on the streets, using the businesses, frequenting things downtown. It brings the vibrancy we're looking for, but it also helps support the businesses. Certain acquisitions in the original plan were for commercial, like I mentioned, along La Rochelle and Central, open space improvements like the Riverfront Park and roadway improvements. We already talked about those, so some of those aren't needed anymore, such as the little kind of bean-shaped shape in the upper part of the slide here. That's that historic red brick building, the Mellow Tiger parcel, Central Street parking, that work took place there, so some of those acquisitions are no longer needed, including acquisitions along Central Street. It's up for discussion, and we can talk about both sides of Central Street, but what is really needed? What would you think would be important to stimulate economic investment? And will it be done on its own with the rail trail coming through, the roadway improvements, and if there's a one-way loop, maybe it's just a matter of letting things improve organically there. So moving into Amendment 1, we want to build upon the past plan and add new things into it. We just want to, kind of re-emphasize some things such as job creation, certain parcels where we want to see economic activity and improved quality of life and sense of pride overall. That's a new goal that was brought into the plan. Future actions, again, building upon what was already in the plan, taking out things that have been done, but adding things in. Certainly want to keep the Riverfront Park and the Riverwalk in there. Central Street retail, what's next? Let's rethink that. Fill storefronts, upper floors. These are all important items that are still relevant today. As part of the 2020 study I referenced, kind of that COVID study, the Redevelopment Authority asked us to look at, is there a need to expand the urban renewal area? A lot has happened in that core area. The town started small and focused, which was great, and has achieved a lot of success with some of the action items. But there are adjacent areas that also are in the need of help. So the blue line shows the proposed new boundary of the amendment number 1 expanded urban renewal area. So on the top, we go further down Hamilton and a little bit down River Crane. Again, expecting some of those parcels are going to become much more attractive with the roadway improvements and the rail trail coming through. And then on the lower and right side, we go all the way to Mechanic Street. There are some parcels along Mechanic and some abutting parcels, such as the old Catholic school there and some other parcels that have been vacant. Proposed for housing, hasn't happened yet. Is there something a redevelopment authority can do to help bring housing into that area? And then also expanded right up here close to Town Hall with the fire station across the street. With the new fire station being built, that building will become available. And then the building right next to this, right next door, that's been commercial space, office buildings and a cafe there. There's interest in putting residential there. Again, bringing people downtown, living downtown, and that's included in the expanded urban renewal boundary in case there's something the redevelopment authority can do to help that project become reality. As I mentioned, we've done a lot of work already. As part of an amendment, we need to update all of the existing conditions, and this is kind of a lead in to these different tables here. So I'm going to let Adam go over what we've done to date, briefly go over them, because once you go to the table, you can see what's been done in more detail, and that becomes a building block on new actions and goals that we want to hear from you tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, my name's Adam. I'm a planner with the BSC group. And over the last month here, we've been doing a lot of existing conditions analysis, a lot of walking the streets, gathering information. It's nice to see, some of the faces who I bumped into when I was out there doing some of this analysis, which is great to see. Thanks for coming. But really, I'm going to talk about not just the existing conditions, but kind of set the table, as Jeff mentioned, for gathering feedback from you tonight at these 4 stations and kind of what we're here to do. So this is really about getting feedback from everybody in the room this evening. So in order to kind of break this down a little bit, we broke our topics into 4 different areas. So one of them is transportation and infrastructure. What do we mean by that? So think about like, sidewalks, walkable neighborhoods, streetscapes, Quinnebog Valley Rail Trail, stormwater systems, getting people, goods, and services, from one place to another. We've got a nice shot of Mechanic Street there, kind of looking down, and that's kind of, think about transportation in that mode, but then also the QVRT, which is the photo on the right there, which was taken earlier in May, so that's well on its way. And so if you think about it like the transportation infrastructure map that we created on here, you'll see that at the station if you go over there. We've got the QVRT and some of the easements and the roadway layout just to give you a little bit of background and kind of prime the pump for, recommendations about different areas or different pieces of infrastructure that could be upgraded or adjusted to make the downtown better. And then also we think about economic development, facade improvements, commercial revitalization, underutilized properties, how can those be revamped or revitalized and potentially into different uses? It was great to see, some brand new commercial spaces opening up, the revitalization of, Central Pizza there, which was super busy when I went by, which was great. So, thinking about economic development, what can be done to different properties. So as part of that, when we created this particular map, this sort of lays out some of the vacant properties in town and where we see areas that revitalization can really be channeled or focused upon. Definitely some properties in the eastern portion of the proposed expanded area, toward just west of Mechanic Street there, but then also sort of at the corner of Hamilton and Main Street. Not just vacant properties, but some vacant buildings, and then the orange hatching that identifies buildings that are partially vacant. So they might have some vacant space on the upper floors or even potentially storefronts on their ground floor. Also housing and land use. So got a great mixed-use building on Main Street there and a multifamily housing that's, you see a lot of in the downtown area. So think about like mixed income housing or some of those topics, zoning and permitting, maybe there's something there that can be adjusted to help revitalize some of these properties, but also need to think about growth management. Where does the downtown or where would you like to see the downtown be in the next 10 or 15 years? It won't happen overnight, but and then also adaptive reuse, some of these more underutilized properties or spaces, how can those be, adjusted and made and turned into new uses that you'd like to see in the downtown area. So when we think about downtown, when we think about housing and land use, the 2 things that jump out usually are like zoning and land uses. So this is a zoning map of the proposed amendment or the proposed expanded area. A lot of this you can see is the central core. Sorry, the colors are a little bit faded out here, which primarily makes up the area along Hamilton and Crane Street, and then sort of like the core downtown. But then you can see with the proposed expansion of the urban renewal area, it brings in a number of other districts, including some office research area, industrial properties, and even some residential zoned areas as well. And I think this map for me, this is really the most helpful map when I think about looking at an area and kind of understanding what's happening, what's going on there, what might need to be changed. And this is a land use map, so this is based off of the existing property classifications from the assessor's office. So you can see you've got your residential properties, which are in that very light tan color. The red represents commercial properties, and multiple or mixed uses are those orange ones. And then the purple ones are the industrial properties in that area. And then lastly, our exempt properties. I always sort of have to remind myself what those are. So those are, town-owned or state-owned properties or religious institutions which are exempt from the tax rolls there. And then the last topic that we classified out was the public realm. And so what do we mean by that? It's like parks and open space, waterfront access, community spaces, the Quinnebog River, which Jeff talked about, accessing that in a number of different ways. Even the sidewalks, if you look at that picture in the lower left there, you think about that space between the roadway and the buildings, about how, maybe that can be enhanced, with some type of lighting or a wider sidewalk or something like that. And also places like World War Memorial Park, how can the community and the downtown sort of build off of that area, looking into the future here. And so we tried to pin these places on the map here with the public realm so you can see the QVRT, some of the parks, and also want to call out Joe Capillo Park, which is just outside of the proposed expanded study area. But, that definitely has an impact and can be a resource to what's going on within the downtown area. So we want to make sure that's highlighted as well. And now we're going to jump into the topic breakout stations here. So I just want to give you a quick overview. Again, this is your opportunity to provide feedback to us. What do we miss? What do we need to look at more? What areas need to be improved? So at each station, there's some boards that you can write on or just kind of talk to us. We have sticky notes that you can put on different places on the boards and provide feedback. We also have some resources. There's some 11 by 17 maps of a lot of the maps I just put up on the screen if you want to get a closer look at them and talk about them, as well as the goals that Jeff went through from the 2020 and 2012 plans. And so if you just look around the room at the front left here, we're going to have transportation and infrastructure, and Bill's going to be manning that station. At your front right, that's going to be the public realm, and Jeff will be at that station. And then over at your right-hand side at 3 o'clock, that's where Peg's sitting. That's going to be economic development. And then behind everyone, sort of, I guess, at the front of the room by the counselor seats, we're going to have housing and land use, and that's where Katie will be staffed. So I think we're going to move into that next, but I think Jeff has a comment here.
Just one quick thing. One is you circulate around to as many of these that you want. We're here to listen as long as you'd like to be. And I want to give you one example of what like great input we got. When Adam and I were walking around doing some initial analysis, someone in one of the buildings came out and said, we have this operation on the first floor, but the upper floors are pretty much empty. I said, what would it take to fill those? He goes, well, I'd like to have residential there, but we don't have enough on-site parking. So we can't put residential there because we can't meet the parking requirements. That's great input for us, because that means maybe we have to look at zoning and what the parking requirements are for residential, or maybe we need to look at some place where there could be a public parking lot that could support a number of parcels so they can make better use of those upper floors. So those types of comments are what we find very, very helpful to us. Any questions before we break up? More about what we're doing tonight. If you have specific questions about specific items, you can ask them at the table. And there's sign-up sheets at each, is it just the one table? At each table, so we want to document who came tonight so we can keep you informed. There will be one more public meeting. So if you give us your name and how we can get in touch with you, we'll let you know of the next meeting when it comes up. The intent is this will be done by August.
Yes.